Domestic violence suspension. He'll be there in New York. With the issue of player protest and statements during the national anthem dividing fans and said to be impacting NFL sponsors and TV ratings, the disarray has now come down to this. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, who has been lobbying and politicking against extending Roger Goodell's contract the way it currently reads, has now hired noted attorney David Boies, and Jones is threatening to sue the NFL. This first reported yesterday by the New York Times and confirmed by Outside the Lines. Goodell's last 3 embattled years have crested this fall as the protests have become a national political issue. Speaking at yesterday's Bloomberg The Year Ahead Summit, Goodell restated his position.
What we tried to do, David, is really try to listen and learn and understand what our players are actually focusing on. And what they're focusing on is really very American. They're talking about improving their communities. They're talking about what do we do in our communities to improve them. And they're focusing on social justice, criminal justice reform, how we bring hope to people and give them opportunities to live a better life. And I'm proud of our players for that. And we're proud of our owners for listening, supporting them, and trying to give them a platform on which to make improvements in our society.
Well, that yesterday, OTL's reporting under the bylines of Don Van Natta and Seth Wickersham on the Jerry Jones threatening to sue story. Don now joins me from Miami. All right, so Don, he's not just hired an attorney. In David Boies, he may have hired the attorney. For those not familiar, give us his pedigree.
David Boies is a legal heavyweight. He represented Al Gore in the deadlocked Florida election in 2000. That's really where he came to fame. He's represented Microsoft, and more recently with some infamous representation of Harvey Weinstein. But Jerry Jones got to know David Boies in 2011 when Boies was hired by the league to represent them in a St. Paul, Minnesota courtroom during the lockout. And of course, David Boies is also a lawyer for DraftKings, and Jerry Jones was an early investor there. I think that Jerry Jones is trying to send a message, a very loud one, to his fellow owners that he's serious, and that's why he's hired somebody like David Boies.
All right, how many of the fellow owners are receptive? How many people are seeing things Jones's way, and why are they upset?
Well, my reporting with Seth Wickersham shows 4 or 5 are in the Jones camp. Dan Snyder of the Redskins and Bob McNair of the Texans are 2 names that we know are with Jones and are upset. There's a couple of others we've not been able to confirm. But Jerry has been frustrated. He's been making this argument now for some time, and he's pushing on a closed door with members of the compensation committee, particularly its chairman, Arthur Blank, of the Falcons. And I think that's why we're seeing this very dramatic move by him to get David Boies on his side and explore all the options.
Now, that committee, of course, the reports that we had seen in the last month was that there was an agreement in principle. Then came the issues dealing with the players, and those conversations that got pushed to the side. Now Jones has activated his attitude here. But you've got a commissioner who's been in that office since 2006, who's been paid Roger Goodell in excess of $200 million. And so the idea, and Jones is pushing for what? An incentivized contract for a guy you've already given a better part of $250 million. Is this the flashpoint for Goodell?
It really is. Our reporting shows that Roger Goodell is furious that Jerry Jones is insisting on so much non-guaranteed money in this 5-year extension that would go to 2024. There's a delicious irony here that Roger Goodell would be furious about this, of course, because all the players have non-guaranteed contracts and incentives that they have to hit. But you know, behind closed doors, Jerry Jones said at the Conrad Hotel last month that Goodell's contract, as it stands now, is one of the most one-sided deals he's ever seen. And that's the argument he's making with his fellow owners.
All right, so he has commercial reasons, he has financial reasons, he has leadership questions, as some people have raised about Goodell over the years. But how much of it is on the field and perhaps even embodied in the fact that Zeke and Jones are in New York and they're going into court in about 55 minutes?
Right. Well, one of the things to remember is that Jerry Jones back in May in Chicago at the spring owners meetings was one of the owners who approved an extension for Roger Goodell. I'm told it was unanimous behind closed doors. All that changed, though, for Jerry Jones in August, when Roger Goodell decided there would be a 6-game suspension of Ezekiel Elliott, the star Cowboys running back. And since then, Jones has changed his tune. Now, I'm told that Jerry's also upset about the way Goodell has handled the anthem controversy, but primarily it's about Ezekiel Elliott. Jerry Jones wants more than anything in the world to win another Super Bowl, and Goodell has stood in the way of that, and that's really the essence of what's going on here.
Okay, guys and their toys. Here comes the big question. If it's not Goodell renewed, and we've got about 20 seconds, what names might there be?
Well, Jerry Jones says he has a candidate. This has actually undercut his arguments because some owners are like, well, wait a minute, then Jerry Jones will really be running the league. We've heard Bill Polian, our colleague, but when I asked him about it the other night, he just laughed for about 10 seconds and said there's no way that's happening.
All right, a lot to watch, and Don and Seth are on it. Don Vanetta and Seth Wickersham supporting online at ESPN.com. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Bob.
Now, the college basketball scandal that continues to seep through the game. At Louisville, the protestations of innocence by fired Hall of Fame coach Rick Pitino are further challenged now by the formal indictments, which expand the original criminal complaints. The indictment of Adidas executive Jim Gatto contains this passage. Former AAU coach Christian Dawkins explained that while Pitino and the University of Louisville were recruiting Brian Bowen, Dawkins asked Pitino to call James Gatto to request that Adidas provide the money requested by the family of Bowen, which Pitino agreed to do, end quote. 3 weeks ago, Pitino, speaking with ESPN's Jay Billis, denied any knowledge of that $100,000 payment.
We're here for, did you have any knowledge of the Bowen family getting any money? Did you have any knowledge of an Adidas transaction? And I answered absolutely not on both questions and passed the lie detector test. So I had no knowledge of any of this.
We point out that was a polygraph that Pitino and his side had ordered up for themselves. The government says one thing, Rick Pitino says another. Jay Billis, who conducted that interview on October 18th, is with me. Where is Pitino's credibility right now, do you think?
Well, it depends on where you sit on that. And I think, Bob, you know this, it's clear. The indictment did not state that Rick Pitino had knowledge. The indictment recounts that Christian Dawkins, an indicted defendant, said that he did. And so that's hearsay evidence. Christian Dawkins also in that indictment is credited with saying that Jim Larrañaga at Miami had that same type of conversation with Larrañaga. So just because Christian Dawkins said that doesn't make it true. Now, I'm not suggesting it's not true, but it doesn't make it true, and that's a distinction without a difference to some people. And some people will look at what has happened with Rick Pitino and his marital indiscretion several years ago, the escort scandal, and now this, and use all those things as to his credibility. So I wouldn't venture to guess where people stand on this issue, but. The issue as to whether he had specific knowledge of what was going on here will, in my judgment, be determined by these wiretaps. That Christian Dawkins's phone has been wiretapped for, my understanding, a couple years now. So if he did indeed have conversations with Rick Pitino and Jim Larrañaga, those conversations should be reflected in those wiretaps.
Yeah, more than just getting the cell phone bill, exactly, and seeing there were connections that would actually potentially could hear. But Pitino's attorneys do make the point. We're not trying to get down the weeds, but for fairness' sake, Pitino's attorney said there are no phone records to support the allegation. Let's talk about the Bruce Pearl situation at Auburn. Head basketball coach, his former associate coach, Chuck Person, former star there, caught up in this, indicted. Pearl is not cooperating with an internal Auburn investigation. He has essentially put his job in jeopardy. If he lasts the season, I think it'll be a miracle. He's not cooperating.
Yeah, and it's a curious matter as to why. Now, Bruce Pearl and his attorney, I'm sure, would say that there's a federal criminal investigation going on that has touched Auburn University in the form of Chuck Person being indicted. That most criminal attorneys might say that you should not sit down for an interview because there may be an opportunity to incriminate yourself because you don't know what Chuck Person's going to say, things like that. But I don't see that as being a major issue here. That Bruce Pearl can certainly walk into an interview with his university and take his attorney with him. And if there are any questions that get near that, the attorney can advise him not to answer those questions. And I know that the university is saying that they would welcome Bruce Pearl's attorney with him. These interviews are supposed to be about eligibility of players. Every university right now is going through a review and trying to determine whether their players are eligible now. So they're asking all their coaches, assistants, and head coaches to certify they're eligible.
Pearl got the issue, of course, fired at Tennessee 6 years ago for lying to an NCAA investigator. Jay Billis, he's got his action plan for reform. It is worth reading online at ESPN.com. Thank you, Counselor. Next up, a daughter's emotional search for the truth about her father, a three-time champion in the NFL who played for Lombardi.
I'd like to give a special thanks to all the men and women out there who have dedicated